So thank you so much for coming to our BTechly Expert Connect Discovery session. Today's topic is basically what you can no longer ignore about your storage gap. So as you know, our gift to you for attending today, I think many of you have chosen, is either a Yeti mug or a Tile Pro. Those will be sent out, allow about 4 to 6 weeks for those to arrive. More importantly, if you have questions, challenges, priorities, be sure to schedule a one-on-one discussion with Michael before his schedule gets booked up, as that happens really quick. And if you want to have a conversation with Michael, we'll be more than happy to provide a meal of your choice delivered either during or after your meeting. So without further ado, today we get to talk with a real expert. We have Michael Drapkin here, the Senior Enterprise Architect from QCM Technologies. Basically knows the ins and outs when it comes to storage. So the first topic that we wanted to address today is shown that even though 98% of businesses still rely on-premise IT systems, cloud spending is growing by nearly 18% annually. So it's paving the way for lots of hybrid approaches. So Michael, the question that we get asked a lot is, can you do hybrid cloud storage wrong? What are some of the best practices? And, in your opinion, are there some systems that are better than others for this approach?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Sandy. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today. So Sandy, I think there's a lot of growth and a lot of interest in cloud over the last decade. It's been, shifting and shaping and changing as cloud does. The elasticity and the things available in the cloud have been changing as well. So can you do cloud storage wrong? Well, I'm sure you can. And we've seen starts and fits that have, the pendulum swings one way and then it swings back because of a misstep. But I think one of the key pieces to choosing hybrid cloud storage and which one to pick is to stand by the old IT adage of it depends, right? When you got to figure out why you want cloud storage or cloud in general, and really start by paying attention to the underlying requirements. I know that there's an inertial quality to wanting to get stuff into the cloud because there's a perception that it will improve things or reduce costs. And all those things are potentially true, but not always bear fruit in the way you intended. And there is no one size that fits all, right? You can't just say, I want cloud storage, because there's a variety of technologies where data is stored and how it's stored. And also, you got to kind of ferret out how it ties to your application stack. I like to follow what I call the fit for purpose methodology, which is, really understanding the functional requirements of whether as a system as a whole or a particular application or an environment or things like that, and then drive that and marry that with the non-functional requirements, and I call them the ilities, right? The availability, security, manageability, and so on that you want to achieve out of that system, and then tie it to your local factors to kind of guide your choice. And so cloud isn't necessarily the only answer, and frequently a lot of times hybrid cloud, keeping some things at home and where you've been doing them for a long time makes sense. So then you develop a hybrid approach because, some things really just belong where they've traditionally been. But you also think that it might seem simple just to move data to the cloud. And I know there's a lot of initial inertia or desire to do that. But I find that in order to be successful from a best practices standpoint is to dip the toe in the water if you haven't done so already, right? Start with some development data, a small set, a use case that makes sense, and see if you can't get to terms with the cloud choice you're making and really how the data lives there and serves you. And then once you develop a pattern of that, you probably can use that in order to scale it across the enterprise and make sure that you add the capabilities of resiliency into that process as well. I think you then need to really determine what success factors are for you and understand what the financials will look like. Frequently, just lifting and shifting it to the cloud has resulted in higher costs, even though there was an expectation it would be less expensive. So you probably need to consider how your environment is going to play out, and maybe even look at there's a model called the systems of engagement, right? That's the stuff where the end user constituents tend to interact with data versus systems of record, which are the core business components. And you gotta kind of figure out if there's a hybrid capability for that too. I mean, how does that really play out in a use case? And a misstep there could leave you totally disconnected and missing the mark. So I would definitely spend some time being thoughtful as you move forward. And don't just consider, some people, I've also seen some people considering copies of data in the cloud, right? Where you just, I want to replicate my data to the cloud, right? You need to be considerate of where the data lives, and you want to keep data near where it's hosted in order to help you with recovery and achieving recovery time objectives. If it's a backup strategy, just pushing into the cloud and then realizing I got 20 terabytes of data I got to bring back home to get my system back up and running may leave you in a time gap that's well worth considering.
Well, that has definitely given a lot of insight into multiple factors. Thank you, Michael. Which brings us into our next our next point is we often hear, almost 51% of enterprises believe app integration is one of the major challenges when it comes to cloud migration. Mm-hmm. So with regard to app integration or modernization, what are the most common roadblocks that you see when it comes to the storage strategy and infrastructure? And, are there certain pitfalls to avoid?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So app integration or modernization or born in the cloud, right, are slightly different variations. So one of the things, and I just, for example, this week I was talking to an IT director of a very large healthcare facility about this kind of a question and how it affects them. And the response I came back with was, well, it's not trivial, right? So you need to really spend time on that as well. And one of the things that really seems to be hard about that is you might have to refactor your application stack. And that is not without risk, and it's not as quick as you might want to think it to be. So it may not be trivial. It also, one of the challenges or problems in roadblocks in doing this is actually budget. It turns out that the transformation from on-premise to in the cloud may require you to shift your procurement model from capital expenses to operational expenses. And that may affect the way budgets are aligned and allocated. So it sometimes causes some internal artifacts that need to be wrestled with in order to even start down the journey. So you need to really consider some of that. Also, you want to consider the concept of locality of reference of data. There was a time historically where you used to place data on a disk drive in a particular set of tracks or cylinders within the disk drive so that you minimize the seek time of the heads in order to achieve the performance necessary, minimize I/O, and achieve performance necessary in the application. So it used to be, where on the disk am I placing it? Now it's, where in the world am I placing it, right? So you've added a totally different strategy or a concern about latency, and knowing where the physical data lives is a real challenge to making sure that the data and the applications work together. Another thing that I find is maturing or coming out of this is that people will choose software as a service or an application vendor's implementation and move their workload off the internal systems to the cloud provider. But then they want to work with the data to do analytics or some kind of insight with it, pass it through some AI inferencing or something, and they require moving that data to yet another cloud. So now you're into a not only hybrid, but a hybrid multi-cloud environment, which may give you some real benefits, but also managing it becomes a real challenge.
Wow. that seems like it could definitely be some pitfalls as moving your apps and then, kind of
Mhm.
wondering how you're going to interact with them. I wanted to also say, if you have any questions, if you want to go ahead and post them in the Q&A
Oh, yeah.
chat, we're going to have a question and answer at the bottom of the hour. So this is the next point, is one that we hear quite frequently. We want to move to the cloud, all right? But 60%, I apologize, lovely new word there. 67% of enterprises express concern about security risk with the public cloud. So this is why they choose a hybrid approach.
Right.
So in doing this, what additional steps should be taken to enhance security in hybrid cloud configurations?
Well, that's great. One of the challenges you find in doing things in the cloud, and if you stand up a VPC or a virtual private cloud environment, you have to define your security policies for that virtual private cloud environment. And if you stand up multiple of them, you have to reestablish those policies across multiple instances, across perhaps multiple providers. So ensuring that you maintain compliance and governance stewardship can be a real challenge. So there's some value in having a consistent way of doing that, and that these days also from a security standpoint, encryption is table stakes, right? You need to understand that data is always a target, and having those capabilities built into whatever storage model you pick is mission critical. And you really need to be looking for storage technologies that don't have a performance penalty, if you will, for implementing encryption. So you don't necessarily want a software-based encryption model if you can avoid it. And you then have to deal with all the other issues like key management and so on. The other thing about security is that there's a thing called there's cyber attacks, right? And everybody's, I'm sure, heard in the news of ransomware, or has been affected by ransomware, or knows someone who has. And as a matter of fact, it's so prevalent that ransomware is actually in the Microsoft Office spell dictionary. So it's out there, right? And we're all looking for ways to protect ourselves from attack. It's usually not if, but when. So we do a lot of things. You have to have tools in place to be proactively trying to prevent things from getting in, but you also have to deal with, well, what if it gets through the defenses? And security models, you have to think about doing things like creating air-gapped immutable copies of your data. And Sandy, an interesting artifact is that one of the best air-gap technologies around these days is still tape. If it's sitting on the shelf, it's awful hard to get to it. So there's a lot of industry who are re-embracing tape for some of that, but it also, recovery time objectives become real important. If you were attacked and you had to go back in time and find a copy of your data that's useful, you kind of need to start putting in place the tools and automation to make immutable copies in a vault of some kind, a storage vault of some kind, and then also set in place tools to regularly wander through that data, looking for integrity of the data, trying to ensure that you know when the last known good thing is, so that if you get, or when you get attacked, you have the ability to make a very short time to recovery for your environment. And also along those lines, as you're thinking about recovery strategies or preparing for recovery strategies, you might start considering things that are application aware, so that they can look at the data that's stored on a system from an application viewpoint and know whether, for example, Cerner healthcare data is consistent, without having to wander through all the data to look for signatures and so on. Excuse me. So there are application aware technologies that are being developed now that help speed that recovery. And it's important to be thinking about how that works. You also should probably automate that process and practice recoveries, just as a guideline. Right? Frequently, we say we have things in place and we don't know whether they will be successful if we need them.
All right. Well, if anybody had questions about that, you very thoroughly explained that. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I know we have a couple of points that we want to go over in an expert wrap up, but we have a question. Um, I hope I say this correctly. So the question is actually, what suggestions do you have for teams in a microservices federated development environment?
Well, with respect, I'm assuming that's with respect to storage, right? Um, so if you're doing microservices and you are deploying them within a particular vendor's technology, um, one of the challenges that you get into sometimes in microservices and choosing the tool set is within that vendor that what a cloud provider, for example, uh, if you pick their microservices platform, you might be really locked into their storage model. So it, there's a perception of moving to the cloud helps me break my vendor lock-in for my on-premise devices and so on. But the reality is moving to the cloud and choosing certain technologies now has you locked in, and you kind of have to use whatever that microservices technology storage model is. There are ways to do things like containerization as a microservice deployment. You can use, if for example, you're choosing to use Docker-like containers and something like an OpenShift or Ansible for automation or OpenShift for container management, you can now manage the storage pieces with that. So that might be a very interesting place to look at things like Ceph or some other container interfaces that are out there that you can talk to variety of storage arrays or storage technologies through those standardized API kind of calls. So in a microservices way, you kind of got to figure out which environment you're doing those services in. I hope that helps.
All right. I hope that answered. If not, maybe we can set some time for you guys to chat one-on-one. So
Sure.
wrapping up, these are kind of the key points we'd like you to just kind of touch on, know why a hybrid model makes sense for you. Talk a little bit about path for resiliency,
Sure.
protection against cyber threats. You've kind of gone over a little bit, and use consistent management tools.
Right. And I think I can't stress enough the consistent management tools. One of the things in building a hybrid environment, you want to simplify. You don't want to have to go to every cloud provider and lock into their tool set to manage their part of it. There are ways to do perhaps software management of your storage that you can leverage whatever platform you end up on. And so that can be a very useful simplification thing, and across the enterprise, not just for a single application.
Okay. I see that we have a couple more questions. So
sure.
Let's go in here. So how does multi-cloud or hybrid cloud model help against cyber threats? Is there a significant impact there?
Well, one of the things in the multi-cloud, and we've seen scenarios where the cloud provider has suffered some kind of an anomaly. If your application is resilient and using multi-cloud platform for authentication or data protection, then you tend to spread the wealth, right? So you tend to give the odds of having a successful working copy go up. But there's also, the concept of hybrid, by the way, I want to just point out, hybrid doesn't necessarily mean a cloud provider at somebody else's data center. You could stand up private cloud technology today, right? And your hybrid cloud could be some traditional capacity that you work with in traditional arrays, but you can have some on-premise cloud delivered, or in other words, cloud delivered, meaning consumption model, OpEx kind of pay as you go kind of capability on premise as well, and you can manage them with a common tool. So that gives you some better resiliency, and you can put more controls around security and protection, even getting the benefit of the cost model, but keeping the data where you want to protect it.
Okay. So is cloud storage typically, is it less expensive than traditional on-prem storage?
Actually, that's a good question. Years ago, I remember a client telling me that the on-prem storage cost 100 times more than the cloud storage. And then they did the analysis, and a lot of times cloud storage comes with a performance, a consumption penalty, in that you can put it in for free, but to use it, to read it, there's a cost per event. And depending on those rates of consumption, there can be unexpected costs. So the analysis was, sometimes the on-premise purchase, while operational, it wasn't OpEx, it was a capital expense, and it was fixed for some number of years as an asset. There were no affiliated or associated access costs. So they fixed in their budget that capability and weren't surprised by anything. Now, if you're doing you're testing things out, you're doing some development work, your access is relatively low, then it can actually be quite effective to grab cloud storage in that way. But if you're going to do that, you want to kind of grab it in the same model that you might consume on premise. So it's not wrong to have a hybrid for the development environment, and then the production work you maybe uses on premise stuff, or a blend. But cost is not always what people think it will be. So it is really worth the time to get to the bottom of what that particular cloud solution metrics will end up being for you.
Okay. So it's very important to kind of weigh the cost of
Sure.
Of your requirements. Okay.
Right, because it's use based.
I think you touched on this a little bit. Let me see if I can. Okay. So can hybrid or cloud only storage break vendor silos? I hope I read that right, guys. Sorry.
Yes, actually. So there's a perception, again, that moving to the cloud, there's a lot of times where you're stuck in one particular vendor's mechanism for storage delivery or data delivery, and the thought is going to the cloud opens things up. A lot of times, even with the microservices discussion and others, you're picking some access method or some storage platform that's unique to that service provider. And so while you think you might be leaving a siloed storage environment, you might actually really be ending up refactoring it into another another silo. So just be careful about that. And there's software-defined storage components that can be layered on top of providers in order to get a kind of a more unified view of data, so that you don't really get locked into that capability being from that one provider, and you can choose to have that multi-cloud strategy for access and not have to get locked in. But it is frequently a case where you're just shifting from one vendor to another.
Okay. All right. Well, if there's any questions that I did not get to, we'll be contacting after, and we can get them answered for you. So sure. If you guys want to schedule a time, first off, to speak with Michael about, I know this stuff can get pretty in the weeds, so you might want to have a more in-depth conversation. Go ahead and schedule a call with him by contacting us. We don't reach out first. And as I said, we'll provide a meal for you. We've placed on the screen, there's 3 areas that you can reach us at. You can reach us on our chat, which is btechly.com. You can reach us at the number listed here, which is 213-502-0682. Or you can also email us directly at connections@btechly.com. So Michael, we want to thank you so much for providing, for not only joining today, but providing us with your ultimate insight when it comes into the storage area. I believe you answered a ton of questions that came in, and like I said, we'll reach out to the rest. We just want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule, and thank you everybody else for taking the time out of their day to join us today. We'll give you back a couple minutes of your day now, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.